Ladies, before I tell you about the night I silenced an entire room with a manila folder, let me ask you something. Have you ever been so underestimated that people forgot you were listening? Tonight's story is about what happens when the sweet little wife they thought they knew turned out to be worth more than their entire family fortune. Have you ever been looked down upon by your own family? Hi there, beautiful souls. My name is Sarah, and tonight I'm going to share with you a story that changed my life forever. The story of how I silenced an entire room of people who thought they knew exactly who I was, with nothing more than a simple manila folder. Before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Are you joining me from sunny California? The beautiful mountains of Colorado? Maybe you're cozied up somewhere on the East Coast, like I am. Please drop a comment below and let me know. I read every single one, and it just warms my heart to connect with all of you wonderful women across this great country. And if this story touches your heart tonight, and I have a feeling it will, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I've got something extra special planned for tomorrow's video, just for my dear subscribers who've been following along on this journey with me. Now let me paint you a picture. 3 years ago, I thought I had it all figured out. I was Mrs. David Wellington, wife to one of Boston's most promising young attorneys, living in a beautiful Back Bay mansion that had housed 4 generations of successful lawyers and judges. The kind of life that little girls dream about. You know, crystal chandeliers, mahogany furniture, worth more than most people's cars, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors looking down from walls lined with first edition law books. This was old money, ladies, the kind of established power and generational prestige that opens doors before you even knock. Everything I thought I had married into when I said yes to David Wellington 3 years earlier. But here's the thing about fairy tales. Sometimes the castle comes with dragons. And on that particular autumn evening, as the scent of roasted turkey and simmering cranberry sauce filled the air of the Wellington estate, I was about to face the biggest dragon of all, the realization that the people I'd been desperately trying to please for 3 years saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment to their perfect family name. You see, I wasn't born into this world. I'm just Sarah Mitchell from Denver, Colorado, daughter of a mechanic and an elementary school teacher. Good, hard-working people who taught me the value of earning what you have. I met David during his brief rebellious phase in graduate school when he was trying to prove he was different from his family's expectations. And for a while, I really believed he was different. During our courtship, he'd often talk about how refreshing it was to be with someone who understood the value of hard work, someone who wasn't just coasting on family connections. He seemed genuinely interested in my ambitions, impressed by my determination to create something of my own. But marriage, my dear friends, has a way of revealing true priorities, and the pressure from his family, well, it was relentless. Tonight was supposed to be special. Not just another monthly family dinner, but a celebration of David's recent promotion to senior partner at his father's prestigious law firm, Wellington and Associates. I had spent 2 weeks planning every single detail, coordinating with their housekeeper to ensure the meal would be absolutely perfect. I'm talking about imported wine from David's favorite vineyard in Tuscany, hand-selected flowers arranged in Grandmother Wellington's antique vases, even a playlist of classical music that his mother Catherine preferred during formal dinners. I had driven to 3 different specialty stores to find the exact herbs for the turkey rub that had been passed down through David's family for generations. Every napkin was pressed to perfection, every piece of silverware polished until it gleamed. The dining room looked like something straight out of Architectural Digest, which was exactly what I'd been aiming for. After 3 years of marriage, I was still desperately trying to prove that I belonged in this world of inherited wealth and social expectations. But what none of them knew What I had been carefully keeping to myself for months was that while they saw me as the struggling little wife playing at business, I had been building something extraordinary, something that would change not just my life, but potentially all of theirs. Hidden away in my home office, locked in a fireproof safe that David didn't even know existed, were documents that told a very different story about Sarah Wellington than the one his family had constructed in their minds. Financial records, client contracts, and legal papers that revealed exactly what kind of businesswoman I really was. As I smoothed my black dress and checked my reflection one last time before joining them for dinner, I had no idea that tonight would be the night everything came crashing down. I didn't know that Catherine's cruelty would reach new heights, that David would choose his family's approval over his wife's dignity, or that I would finally be pushed past the point of polite tolerance. I certainly didn't know that by the end of the evening, the carefully constructed hierarchy of the Wellington family would be turned completely upside down, and that the little wife with her little business would be revealed as something far more powerful than any of them had ever imagined. You know, looking back now, I can see that everything that happened that night was meant to be. Sometimes we need to be pushed to our absolute breaking point to discover just how strong we really are. Sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who end up learning the most important lesson of all. So settle in, dear friends, because this is a story about discovering your own worth, about standing up for yourself when no one else will, and about what happens when you finally stop asking for permission to be exactly who you were meant to be. And trust me when I tell you, you're going to want to hear every single word of what happened next. Now, before I tell you about that life-changing dinner, I need you to understand exactly what I was up against. The Wellington family wasn't just wealthy. They were Boston royalty, the kind of family that had their names on hospital wings and university buildings. And honey, let me tell you, they never let anyone forget it. At the head of this dynasty sat Judge Robert Wellington, David's grandfather, 82 years old and still sharp as a tack. This man had served on the Massachusetts Supreme Court for over 20 years, and his portrait hung in the State House. He had that particular brand of New England authority that could silence a room with just a raised eyebrow. Beside him was his wife, Margaret Wellington, 80 years old and still hosting charity galas that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. She had this way of looking at you over her reading glasses that made you feel like you were being evaluated for purchase. Margaret wielded social influence like a weapon, and everyone in Boston's elite circles knew better than to cross her. Then there were David's parents, Judge Thomas Wellington and his wife Catherine. Thomas presided over Suffolk County Superior Court and was being mentioned for federal appointments. But if Thomas was the official head of the family, Catherine was undoubtedly its true ruler. At 55, she was everything I was not. Elegant, polished, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting what she saw as her family's interests. Catherine had that particular talent some wealthy women possess for making cruelty sound like kindness, for delivering devastating insults wrapped in silk. She sat on 3 major charity boards and had turned volunteering into a full-time career of social manipulation. And then there were David's siblings, the golden children who had never once disappointed family expectations. Jennifer Wellington, 28, was the family's shining star. Fresh from Harvard Law School, where she'd graduated summa cum laude, she was already making waves as a prosecutor. Jennifer was beautiful in that effortless way that comes from good genes and better breeding, tall blonde with confidence that radiates from someone who's never questioned whether they deserve their place in the world. Michael Wellington, the eldest at 36, was a federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime. He had married Patricia Ashworth, daughter of another prominent Boston family, in what the society pages called the wedding of the decade. Their lives were a carefully choreographed performance of upper-class perfection. Into this world of inherited privilege, I had arrived 3 years earlier, like a goldfish who'd suddenly found herself swimming with sharks. My background couldn't have been more different. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, where my father Jim ran his own auto repair shop, and my mother Linda taught third grade for 32 years. We weren't poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy. Family vacations meant camping in the Rocky Mountains, not summers in Europe. But my parents taught me to dream big and work hard to make those dreams reality. That's where I met David at Harvard Business School during our second year. He was taking corporate ethics, which looking back seems almost comically ironic, and I was concentrating in operations management. During our study sessions, David would talk about feeling trapped by expectations, wanting to prove he was more than just another Wellington heir coasting on family connections. Our first date was coffee at a little cafe near campus. Nothing fancy, just two graduate students talking about dreams and fears. David seemed so different from the privileged stereotype I'd expected. He talked about wanting to do meaningful work, and for the first time in my life, I felt like someone truly saw and appreciated my ambitions. The proposal came during our final semester in the garden behind the business school library. "Sarah," he said, voice shaking with emotion, "you've shown me what it means to love someone for who they really are. Will you marry me and help me become the man I want to be?" I said yes without hesitation, swept up in the romance and promise of a life built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Looking back now, I can see that David meant every word in that moment. The problem was that good intentions are no match for family pressure and social expectations. The engagement period should have been my first warning. The moment David called his parents, I could feel the shift in his energy. "They want to meet you," he said, and something in his tone made it sound more like a summons to court than an invitation to dinner. That first dinner at the Wellington Mansion was like attending a very polite audition where I didn't know the lines. Catherine greeted me with a smile that never reached her eyes, asking pointed questions about my background that felt more like a job interview. "So, Sarah dear," Catherine had said, "David tells us your father is in automotive repair." The way she said it made honest work sound vaguely distasteful. When I mentioned my plans to start a consulting business, the reaction was subtle but unmistakable. Polite smiles, gentle discouragement wrapped in concern. "How ambitious," Margaret had murmured, "though of course once you're married, you'll have so many other responsibilities to focus on." The wedding itself was a Wellington production from start to finish. What I had imagined as an intimate celebration became a social event designed to reinforce family status. I walked down the aisle of Trinity Church in Copley Square, wearing a dress that cost more than my parents' annual vacation budget. The honeymoon period lasted about 6 months. David and I settled into the carriage house behind his parents' mansion, a temporary arrangement that somehow never became temporary. David threw himself into work at the family firm, while I began trying to build my own career while navigating the treacherous waters of Wellington family expectations. The first year of marriage was like learning to live in a house of mirrors. Everywhere I looked, I saw distorted reflections of who I was supposed to be rather than who I actually was. Living so close to his parents meant our lives were under constant subtle surveillance. Catherine had a way of dropping by unannounced, always with some perfectly reasonable excuse, but these visits always left me feeling somehow diminished. She had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, the concerned suggestion that felt more like criticism. "I noticed you were working quite late last night," she'd say. "All that stress can't be good for your complexion. Have you considered that maybe you're pushing yourself too hard with this little business idea?" The little business idea became Catherine's standard way of referring to my consulting work, somehow always making it sound like a hobby rather than a serious professional endeavor. The social expectations were exhausting and seemingly endless. There was Catherine's monthly book club charity committee meetings, country club events, where conversations revolved around people and places I'd never heard of discussed with casual assumption that everyone shared the same references. I tried, God knows I tried. I bought the right clothes, learned the unspoken rules, smiled and nodded in all the appropriate places. But no matter how hard I worked to fit in, I remained perpetually aware of my outsider status. Jennifer was particularly skilled at making exclusion feel like kindness. "Oh, Sarah," she'd say at family gatherings, "you probably don't know Judge Harrison's daughter. She went to boarding school with me. But you'd really like her. She's very down to earth." The implication was always that I needed things to be down to earth, because the rarefied air of their social circle was too thin for someone of my background. The breaking point came during our first Thanksgiving as a married couple. I had spent weeks researching Wellington family history, practicing recipes, reading up on current topics so I could contribute meaningfully to dinner conversation. When there was a natural pause in Jennifer's career discussion, I shared news about landing my biggest client to date, a manufacturing company needing supply chain restructuring. The contract was worth $75,000 more money than I'd ever made on a single project. "That's wonderful that you have a little project to work on," Catherine had said, cutting off my explanation. "Though I do hope it won't interfere with the holiday entertaining season. There are so many important events coming up." The word little hit like a physical blow. $75,000 dismissed as a little project that might inconveniently interfere with party attendance. But it was David's response that truly devastated me. Instead of defending my achievement, he simply nodded agreement. "Sarah's very dedicated to her consulting work, but you're right, Mother. We need to make sure she's available for the important social commitments." That night, lying in bed next to my husband, I realized with crystal clarity that no amount of effort was going to earn me genuine acceptance from this family. They needed me to be a specific type of person, decorative, deferential, and entirely focused on supporting David's advancement. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. If they were determined to see me as small and inconsequential, I would use their blindness as protection. I would build something extraordinary right under their noses, something so substantial they couldn't dismiss it when the time came for revelation. That decision to build my empire in secret while playing the role of dutiful daughter-in-law. Well, honey, let me tell you, it nearly broke me before it made me. But sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who underestimates you is to let them keep thinking they're right while you quietly prove them wrong. The morning after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While David showered and prepared for another day at Wellington and Associates, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop and made a list that would change everything. Rule number 1, no more sharing victories with people invested in my failure. Rule number 2, build the business using my maiden name to maintain complete separation. Rule number 3, create a professional infrastructure that exists entirely outside the Wellington sphere of influence. Rule number 4, document everything, because someday I might need proof of what I'd accomplished. That very day, I drove across town to Cambridge and signed a lease for a small office space under the name Mitchell Solutions. Using my maiden name felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd almost lost. The space wasn't much, just 800 square feet in a converted warehouse building. But it had good bones, plenty of natural light, and most importantly, it was mine. Setting up Mitchell Solutions required more than just office space. I needed to create an entirely separate business identity, complete with its own bank accounts, phone lines, and professional relationships. I opened business accounts at a different bank, got a separate cell phone, even hired a part-time answering service. The most challenging part was creating a professional wardrobe that I could keep at the office. At home, I dressed like David's wife, conservative, understated. But at Mitchell Solutions, I needed to look like the CEO I was becoming. Confident, authoritative, unmistakably successful. I kept a complete second wardrobe in my office closet, along with backup makeup and accessories. Some mornings, I'd leave the carriage house looking like David's deferential wife and arrive at my office ready to transform into the businesswoman the Wellingtons refused to acknowledge I could be. My first real client was Martinez Logistics, a family-owned freight company struggling with inefficient routing and inventory management. Rosa Martinez had recently taken over operations and was desperately trying to modernize the business before it went under. Our first meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon when David thought I was at Catherine's book club. "I've talked to other consultants," Rosa told me, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "But they all want to charge us more than we make in 3 months, and they don't really understand our business. I need someone who can work with our budget and actually solve our problems." This was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been dreaming about. A real business with real problems that required innovative solutions. Over the next 6 hours, I analyzed their entire operation, identified 17 specific areas for improvement, and developed a comprehensive restructuring plan. Rosa didn't care about my background or social connections. She cared about results. When I presented my analysis, she looked at the numbers, asked smart questions, and made her decision based on pure business merit. "When can you start?" she asked, and I felt a rush of professional validation that I'd never experienced in any Wellington family gathering. The Martinez project became my proving ground. I spent 3 months completely overhauling their operations, implementing new routing software, training their staff, and developing performance metrics. The results were extraordinary. 32% cost reduction, 45% improvement in on-time delivery, and customer satisfaction scores at the highest levels in company history. But managing this success while maintaining my Wellington wife persona required constant vigilance and creative scheduling. David's family operated on a predictable social calendar, and I learned to schedule my most intensive client work around these obligations. The lies started small and grew more elaborate. "I'm meeting with the florist about the hospital gala," became code for "I have a board presentation." "I need to run errands downtown," translated to "I'm closing a 6-figure contract." Each successful project led to bigger opportunities, and within 18 months, Mitchell Solutions had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I first signed that lease. But with success came complications that tested every aspect of my double life. The breakthrough came when I developed what I privately called the Wellington algorithm, an artificial intelligence system that could analyze complex operational data and provide real-time optimization recommendations. The irony of naming my most innovative creation after the family that considered me intellectually inferior wasn't lost on me. My first test case was Brookstone Manufacturing, a company producing specialized aerospace components. They were struggling with production delays, quality control issues, and cost overruns threatening their major contracts. I spent 2 weeks on site, often telling David I was attending extended charity meetings. The results were revolutionary. Within 30 days, Brookstone had reduced production time by 28%, improved quality scores by 35%, and saved over $400,000 in operational costs. More importantly, they secured 2 new major contracts based on improved performance. Patricia Hendricks, their CEO, was so impressed that she recommended me to 3 other aerospace companies. Suddenly, I was working with clients whose annual revenues were in the hundreds of millions. These weren't the little companies with efficiency problems that the Wellingtons imagined. These were major corporations affecting thousands of employees across entire regions. By the end of my second year in business, Mitchell Solutions was generating over $800,000 in annual revenue, and I was fielding inquiries from Fortune 500 companies. But the more successful I became, the more isolated I felt from my own life. David would come home complaining about difficult clients, looking for sympathy and support that I genuinely wanted to provide. But I couldn't reciprocate by sharing my own professional challenges because in his mind, I didn't have any professional challenges worth discussing. The emotional toll was exhausting. I was developing solutions that saved companies millions of dollars, creating innovations that were revolutionizing how businesses operated, building a reputation that attracted attention from industry leaders across the country. But at home, I was still the wife who needed gentle guidance about social obligations. The breaking point in this carefully balanced double life came during my third year when I received a call that would change everything. Dr. Angela Chen, the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Global Corporation, one of the largest consulting firms in the world, had been tracking my work through industry contacts. "Ms. Mitchell," she said during our initial phone conversation, "your operational efficiency work has been generating significant attention in circles that matter. We've been monitoring the results you've achieved with Brookstone Martinez and several other clients, and frankly, we're impressed." She paused. "We'd like to explore the possibility of acquiring Mitchell Solutions and bringing you in as a senior partner. This would be a significant transaction. We're talking about an acquisition price in the 8-figure range plus ongoing equity participation that could be extraordinarily lucrative." 8 figures. That meant at least $10 million, possibly significantly more. For the little business that Catherine dismissed as an inappropriate hobby, I managed to maintain my professional composure during the call, but after I hung up, I sat in my Cambridge office and cried, not from sadness, but from a complex mixture of validation, relief, and something that felt remarkably like grief for all the years I'd spent seeking approval from people who were never going to give it. Dr. Chen wanted to meet in person. "I'll be in Boston on Thursday," she said. "Perhaps we could have dinner to explore this opportunity in more detail." Thursday, the same day as Catherine's monthly charity committee meeting where I was expected to help plan the hospital gala. The same evening when I was supposed to be playing the role of dutiful daughter-in-law. I picked up my phone and called Dr. Chen back. "Thursday evening works perfectly," I said. "I'll be there." The meeting was at Mistral, an upscale restaurant far enough from Beacon Hill to minimize risk of running into anyone from David's social circle. Dr. Chen was exactly what I'd expected, impeccably dressed, radiating the quiet confidence that comes from wielding real power in a male-dominated industry. "What you've developed," she said over the main course, "isn't just consulting, it's prediction. Your algorithm doesn't just identify inefficiencies, it anticipates them. That kind of forward-looking capability is exactly what Meridian Global needs to maintain our competitive edge." She leaned forward, expression becoming more intense. "I'm authorized to offer you $15 million for complete acquisition of Mitchell Solutions, plus a 5-year consulting contract that would guarantee you an additional $12 million in compensation. $27 million total. The little business that Catherine wanted me to abandon was worth more money than the entire Wellington family had accumulated over 4 generations. "That's certainly a significant offer," I replied, buying time to process the magnitude of what she was proposing. Dr. Chen smiled. "I have a complete proposal package prepared. Take whatever time you need to review it, but I hope you'll consider moving forward quickly. Opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely." As we concluded the evening, Dr. Chen made one final comment. "You know, Ms. Mitchell, I have to ask, does your family understand what you've accomplished? Building something like Mitchell Solutions requires enormous dedication and sacrifice. I hope you have people in your life who appreciate the magnitude of what you've achieved." Her words echoed in my mind as I drove home. Did my family understand what I'd accomplished? They didn't even know what I'd accomplished, let alone understand it. Over the next 3 days, I studied Dr. Chen's proposal with the intensity of a law student preparing for the bar exam. The numbers were even more impressive when laid out in detail. The acquisition price was structured to minimize tax implications. The consulting contract included performance bonuses that could add millions more. But beyond the financial implications, the offer represented something even more valuable: validation. Meridian Global didn't acquire small businesses or indulge entrepreneurial hobbyists. They identified and purchased companies that were reshaping entire industries. By Sunday evening, I had made my decision. I would accept Meridian Global's offer, but I would tell David and his family about it first. They deserved to hear the truth from me, rather than discovering it through business channels. More importantly, I deserved to see their faces when they learned that the woman they had been trying to shrink down to size was actually larger than all of them combined. I had no idea that the universe had its own timing in mind, and that the revelation would come in a way that was more dramatic and devastating than anything I could have planned. Because sometimes, dear friends, fate has a sense of irony that surpasses even our most carefully laid plans. You know, ladies, there's something almost poetic about how life can change in a single evening. All those months of careful planning, strategic deception, and measured choices. And then fate steps in with its own timeline that makes all your preparation irrelevant. That's exactly what happened on the night that would forever divide my life into before and after. It was a Tuesday in late October, and Boston was experiencing one of those perfect autumn days that make you remember why people fall in love with New England. I woke up that morning with no idea that by evening, my carefully constructed double life would come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. The call came just as I was finishing my morning coffee. Catherine's voice carried that particular tone of barely contained excitement that I'd learned to associate with major family announcements. "Sarah, darling," she said, "I know this is terribly last minute, but we simply must have a proper celebration dinner tonight for David's promotion. Thomas just got off the phone with Judge Morrison, and David's appointment to senior partner is going to be announced in the Bar Journal next week. We can't let such a momentous occasion pass without proper family recognition." My heart sank. The Meridian Global proposal was sitting in my office safe, waiting for my final decision. Instead of spending the evening reviewing those life-changing documents, I would be playing the role of grateful daughter-in-law. "Of course, Catherine," I replied. "What can I do to help? Could you possibly handle the flowers? You have such a talent for making even simple arrangements look elegant." There it was again. That casual diminishment wrapped in false praise, being trusted to arrange flowers while hiding a $27 million business deal. The morning flew by in preparations. I drove to florists, coordinated with their housekeeper, picked up David's favorite wine, all while thinking about the folder in my safe that would fundamentally change how every person at tonight's dinner viewed me. The Wellington mansion was buzzing with activity when I arrived with my flowers. Catherine was in full hostess mode, Jennifer was already holding court about her latest prosecution, and Michael was on important phone calls in the study, everyone performing their roles in the family hierarchy. David arrived at 6:30, practically glowing with pride. For a moment, watching him bask in his family's approval, I felt a pang of something that might have been regret. This was the man I'd fallen in love with. Successful, confident, genuinely worthy of celebration. "Sarah, darling, come here," David called out. I couldn't have done this without my wife's support. Support. Not partnership, not collaboration. Support. As if my primary role was to provide encouragement rather than achieve anything meaningful myself. The dining room looked perfect. Catherine had outdone herself with roasted duck wild rice and autumn vegetables. For the first hour, everything proceeded exactly as planned. Safe conversation about David's new responsibilities, Jennifer's cases, Michael's federal appointment prospects. But then the conversation shifted toward more personal territory, and that's when everything went sideways. It started with Patricia describing a charity event, which evolved into a broader discussion about how the women in the family contributed through volunteer work and social leadership. It's so important for women in our position to give back, Catherine said, wielding that tone of moral authority like a weapon. We've been blessed with advantages, and it's our responsibility to use them to benefit others less fortunate. Jennifer nodded. That's exactly why I chose prosecution over private practice. There's something deeply satisfying about using my legal education to protect society. They were all so comfortable in their established roles, so confident in their socially approved forms of success, until Catherine turned her attention to me with that focused intensity I'd learned to dread. "And what about you, Sarah dear?" she asked with deceptive gentleness. "Have you given any more thought to how you might contribute to our family's tradition of community service? I know you've been busy with your little consulting projects, but surely there's room in your schedule for more meaningful pursuits." Little consulting projects. Meaningful pursuits? I felt something shift inside my chest, that familiar tightening that came with their casual dismissiveness. "Actually," I began carefully, "my consulting work has been quite demanding lately. I've been developing some innovative approaches to operational efficiency that are generating significant interest from major corporations." Catherine's smile never wavered, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "How lovely that you're staying busy. But surely you can see the difference between managing some small local projects and the kind of substantial community leadership we're discussing. Jennifer's work affects our entire city's safety. Michael's cases have national implications. These are contributions that truly matter." The room went quiet. Everyone's attention focused on this exchange with uncomfortable awareness. Jennifer leaned forward with predatory attention. "Sarah, I don't think anyone's trying to underestimate your work, but you have to understand there are different levels of professional achievement. My cases involve prosecuting people who've stolen millions from pension funds, ruined thousands of families' retirement savings. That requires specialized education, extensive experience, and the ability to handle enormous responsibility." The condescension was breathtaking. Someone 6 years out of law school lecturing me about professional achievement as if my Harvard MBA was equivalent to a lemonade stand. Michael joined the attack. "Sarah, we all appreciate that you want to contribute professionally, but there's a difference between wanting a career and actually having the background and connections necessary to operate where decisions really matter." He gestured around the table. "Everyone here has spent years building expertise and relationships that open doors to meaningful opportunities. You have consulting, which is fine, but without the right credentials or family connections, there's only so far that can take you." The silence was electric with tension. David sat beside me and I could feel his discomfort. But still, he said nothing to defend me. That's when Catherine delivered what she intended as the killing blow. She set down her wine glass with deliberate precision and fixed me with that smile I'd come to hate. "You know, Sarah, darling," she began with the tone of someone about to share wisdom with a stubborn child, "I've been thinking about your situation quite a lot lately, and I have to say I'm concerned." The room went completely quiet except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Here you are, 3 years into marriage, still clinging to these entrepreneurial fantasies instead of embracing your role as David's wife and a member of this family. This determination to play businesswoman instead of accepting that you've already achieved the greatest success any woman could hope for, marrying into one of the city's most respected families. It suggests a certain immaturity. Play businesswoman. 3 years of revolutionary innovation reduced to childhood make-believe. And frankly, Catherine continued, it's becoming an embarrassment. People are starting to talk, Sarah. They're wondering why David's wife feels the need to pretend she's running some kind of business empire instead of focusing on duties that actually matter. Judge Robert shifted uncomfortably. Catherine, perhaps we should... But Catherine silenced him with a raised hand, her eyes never leaving my face. Someone needs to help you understand reality, dear. These little consulting jobs, this stubborn insistence on having a career that competes with your husband's success, it's not charming anymore. It's selfish, and it's holding David back from reaching his full potential. The attack was so comprehensive, so precisely aimed at every insecurity I'd harbored that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Do you know how many senior partners' wives sit on important charity boards? How many host social events that bring in major clients? While you're off playing with spreadsheets, David's career is suffering because his wife can't fulfill her actual responsibilities. But it was what happened next that truly broke something inside me. I turned to David expecting him to finally stand up for me, to tell his family their attack was inappropriate and cruel. Instead, I watched him clear his throat, that nervous sound I recognized as his tell, and join their assault. You know, he said with careful, measured tone, Mother does have a point, Sarah. The betrayal was immediate and complete. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend my work. Instead, he joined them. We've been married 3 years now, and you're still acting single, still prioritizing these consulting projects over our family obligations. David, I said quietly, what exactly are you saying? He looked directly at me, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger or frustration, it was embarrassment. He was embarrassed by me. I'm saying maybe it's time to be realistic about your priorities. You're a Wellington now. That comes with certain expectations. And frankly, this stubborn insistence on playing entrepreneur is starting to reflect poorly on the family. Playing entrepreneur. The exact same phrase as his mother. Jennifer piled on. Plus, Sarah, it's not like your little business is actually successful. If it were really taking off, you'd be able to afford help instead of spending all your time on tiny projects. Michael nodded sagely. There's a difference between having a hobby and having a career. From what we can see, your consulting work falls into the hobby category. I looked around the table, cataloging every expression of smug superiority and casual dismissal. These people who had smiled at our wedding, who had spent 3 years systematically undermining my confidence. But David's betrayal cut deepest. David, who had seen me work until midnight, who knew exactly how hard I worked and how much my business meant to me. Look, sweetheart, he said, the endearment sounding like an insult. Nobody's saying you can't have interests, but there's a difference between having interests and neglecting your real responsibilities. What real responsibilities? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Catherine smiled triumphantly. Well, for starters, you could join the Hospital Auxiliary Board, and there's the Children's Literacy Foundation. They're always looking for dedicated volunteers. Volunteer work, David added, something that would actually benefit the community instead of just feeding your ego. Feeding my ego. 3 years of revolutionary business development reduced to ego gratification. And of course, Catherine continued dreamily, there's the matter of children. You've been married 3 years now, Sarah. Don't you think it's time to start thinking about giving David the family he deserves? The family he deserves, as if I were withholding children out of spite. They had laid out their ultimatum with devastating clarity. Abandon my career, join their charity boards, start producing heirs, and become the decorative wife their social circle expected. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate despite the rage building inside me. Excuse me for just a moment, I said with perfect politeness despite the fire in my chest. I need to get something from my office. As I walked toward the door, I could hear Catherine's satisfied voice. Finally, perhaps now she'll stop this foolishness and start acting like a proper Wellington wife. But Catherine had no idea that I wasn't going to cry or accept their verdict. I was going to get the folder that would destroy every assumption they'd ever made about me. The folder containing documents worth $27 million. The folder that would prove exactly what kind of businesswoman Sarah Wellington really was. The walk to my office felt like moving through a dream or waking up from a 3-year nightmare. Each step was a step toward reclaiming the woman I'd been before I started apologizing for my existence. I unlocked the safe and pulled out not just the Meridian Global proposal, but my complete portfolio of evidence, financial statements, client testimonials, patent documentation, industry awards, everything that would obliterate their assumptions about my capabilities. As I assembled my nuclear option, I thought about my sister Lisa calling 2 weeks earlier, bubbling with excitement about her nonprofit promotion. When she told our parents Dad had cried with pride, saying he was proud of both his daughters for building something meaningful. Both his daughters. Our parents saw achievement worth celebrating. The Wellingtons saw pretension needing correction. I thought about Dr. Chen's respectful questions, her obvious admiration for my work. The difference in treatment was staggering. She saw me as an equal whose innovations could enhance her company. The Wellingtons saw me as a child whose fantasies needed discouragement. Tonight, they were going to learn their assessment hadn't just been wrong. It had been catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. The folder complete, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if everything had been leading to this moment. But I also felt sadness, not for myself, but for David, who was about to learn his failure to support his wife hadn't just been cruel, it had been stupidly self-destructive. I checked my reflection. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the grateful daughter-in-law who had left that dinner table. This woman had steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. This woman was done apologizing for her success. As I walked back, I could hear resumed conversation. They were probably discussing my dramatic exit, perhaps taking bets on whether I'd return in tears. The idea that I might return with a weapon capable of destroying their worldview had never occurred to them. I paused outside the doorway, observing them in their natural state. Catherine holding court, David nodding along, Jennifer checking her phone, Michael and Patricia discussing the drama with detached interest. They had no idea what was coming. I stepped into the doorway. Conversations stopped. Glasses paused, every face turned toward me, with expressions ranging from cautious concern to barely concealed satisfaction. "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting," I said with surprising calmness. I wanted to make sure I brought the right documentation. I walked to my seat with unhurried grace. The folder remained closed, its contents a mystery, clearly making several people nervous. Catherine recovered first. "Of course, dear. We were just discussing the upcoming charity gala. I do hope you'll consider joining the planning committee once you've sorted out your priorities. Already planning my post-surrender rehabilitation." "Actually," I said, setting the folder directly in front of me, "I wanted to address some misconceptions about my work." David shifted uncomfortably. "Sarah, I really think we should discuss this privately." "No," I interrupted with newfound authority. "You decided to make this public when you joined your family in attacking my career, so we'll finish it publicly." The silence was electric. Jennifer's phone disappeared. Michael abandoned his wine. Catherine's smile became fixed and artificial. "Darling," Catherine said, straining to maintain authority, "I think you may be overreacting to what was just friendly family conversation." "Friendly?" I repeated, hand resting on the closed folder. "Is that what we're calling threatening to socially isolate me if I don't abandon my career? Publicly humiliating me for having ambitions beyond charity luncheons?" My fingers traced the folder's edge, several pairs of eyes trying to read through the manila cover. You've all spent the evening explaining what real success looks like. I continued, voice growing stronger. You've made it clear that my little consulting business is an embarrassment to this family's reputation. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. So, I think it's time you learned exactly what kind of businesswoman you've been trying to silence. The folder lay before me like a promise of revolution. For the first time in 3 years of marriage, I had the Wellington family's complete and undivided attention. The moment had arrived. The reckoning they'd unknowingly been building toward for 3 years was about to begin. I could feel the weight of vindication in my hands. 3 years of proof that I was everything they'd refused to believe I could be. Around the table, I could see subtle signs of nervousness creeping into their confident facades. David was staring at the folder with an expression I'd never seen before. Not curiosity or concern, but fear. Maybe he was beginning to realize that the woman he'd systematically underestimated might have been keeping secrets that would change everything. "Sarah," he said, voice carrying warning, "whatever you think you're going to prove with those papers, I really think we should handle this privately." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd given anyone all evening. But it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who just realized she held all the power. "Oh, David," I said softly, "we're far beyond private family matters now. Your family made sure of that when they decided to publicly humiliate me for having the audacity to build something meaningful." I placed my hand flat on the folder, feeling the thick stack of documents beneath. Documents representing millions of dollars' revolutionary innovations and the complete destruction of every assumption these people had made about my worth. "Besides," I continued, voice gaining strength, "I think it's important that everyone here understands exactly what they've been dismissing as a little hobby." The silence was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat, could sense the collective held breath of people about to learn they had drastically, embarrassingly, devastatingly underestimated the wrong woman. I opened the folder, and their world ended. The first document I lifted from the folder was deliberately chosen for maximum impact. The Meridian Global letterhead was immediately recognizable to anyone who understood business at the highest levels. Their corporate logo had appeared on the front pages of financial newspapers countless times over the past decade. "This," I said, holding the letter so that everyone at the table could see it clearly, "is a formal acquisition offer from Meridian Global Corporation." The reaction was immediate and electric. Michael's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips, suspended in mid-air, as his brain struggled to process what I had just said. Jennifer's eyes widened with the kind of shock that comes from having your fundamental assumptions about reality suddenly challenged. Even Catherine's practiced composure cracked, her mouth falling slightly open as she stared at the official letterhead in my hands. But it was David's reaction that cut deepest. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked dangerously close to panic. This was not the woman he had married, not the struggling entrepreneur he had been condescendingly supporting, not the amateur businesswoman who needed his family's guidance to understand her place in the world. Meridian Global. I continued, my voice carrying across the silent room like a bell cutting through fog, has offered to purchase my consulting company for $15 million. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the ice settling in Judge Roberts' whiskey glass 3 seats away. Catherine's hand trembled slightly as she set down her wine, the crystal making a tiny chiming sound against the mahogany table that seemed unnaturally loud in the stunned quiet. $15 million, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air like smoke from a fire that had just consumed everything they thought they knew about me. "For the little hobby that you've all been so concerned about." You know, ladies, there's something absolutely intoxicating about watching people's entire worldview crumble in real time. For 3 years, I had been the grateful outsider, the woman who should feel lucky to have married into their distinguished family. Now, in the span of 30 seconds, I had become someone who commanded more wealth than their entire dynasty had accumulated over 4 generations. Jennifer was the first to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. That's not possible. Meridian Global is one of the largest consulting firms in the world. They don't acquire small businesses. I smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was a genuine expression of satisfaction rather than social politeness. You're absolutely right, Jennifer. They don't acquire small businesses. They acquire revolutionary companies that are disrupting their industry. I pulled out the next document, a financial statement that showed revenue figures that dwarfed anything the Wellingtons had imagined possible. The numbers seemed to glow under the chandelier light, each figure a devastating blow to the narrative they had constructed about my inadequacy. These are my earnings for the past 18 months. I said, placing the document where everyone could see it. As you can see, my little consulting practice has generated over $2.8 million in revenue. The numbers on the page seemed to dance before their eyes. David leaned forward, squinting at the document as if he could somehow make the figures smaller through sheer force of will. His face had gone pale, and I could see his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his wine glass. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Catherine said, her voice lacking its usual authority. $2.8 million from a home-based business. That's simply not possible. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said with mock concern, enjoying every second of their confusion. "Did I forget to mention that I don't actually work from home? I have a fully equipped office facility in Cambridge, complete with enterprise-level servers and direct connections to Fortune 500 client networks." I watched the blood drain from David's face as he realized the implications. Every late night I had supposedly spent working from my home office, every small client meeting I had mentioned over dinner, every casual reference to my modest business operations. All of it had been a carefully constructed fiction designed to protect my success from their systematic demolition. "You lied to us," he said, his voice hollow with shock and something that might have been hurt. "No," I corrected, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I protected my achievements from people who were determined to diminish them. There's a difference." I pulled out the client documentation pages bearing the logos of corporations that even the Wellingtons would recognize and respect. These are testimonials from CEOs of major corporations who have worked with Mitchell Solutions, Boston Medical Center, whose operational efficiency I improved by 35%, saving them $1.2 million annually. Northeastern University, where my algorithms reduced administrative costs by 40% while improving student services. Judge Robert leaned forward, his judicial training overcoming his shock as he tried to process the evidence before him. "Sarah, these are major institutions, the kind of organizations that have entire departments dedicated to operational consulting." "Exactly," I said, pulling out more documents. "Atlantic Global Corporation, New England Electric, Massachusetts General Hospital, State Street Corporation. These aren't the little companies with efficiency problems that you all dismissed so casually. These are major employers' economic engines that affect thousands of people's livelihoods." Michael was staring at the documents with the kind of stunned expression usually reserved for car accident scenes. His prosecutor's mind was clearly struggling to reconcile the evidence before him with everything he thought he knew about my capabilities. "Even if this is all legitimate," he said carefully, his voice lacking its usual authority, "it doesn't change the fact that you've been deceiving your own family for months." "My own family?" I repeated, looking around the table at faces that had spent the evening systematically tearing down my confidence and threatening my independence. Is that what we're calling people who mock your achievements, dismiss your ambitions, and demand that you abandon your career to fit their social expectations? I reached for the patent documentation official government seals that clearly demonstrated the sophisticated nature of my work. These are the 3 patents I hold for revolutionary approaches to operational efficiency. According to my intellectual property attorney, they're worth an estimated $8 million in licensing potential alone. The papers rustled as I spread them across the table, each document another nail in the coffin of their condescending certainty about my limitations. Patent numbers, technical specifications, and official USPTO approval stamps, evidence that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. Patents, Jennifer said faintly, as if the word itself was foreign to her. You hold actual patents. 3 of them, I confirmed, for artificial intelligence algorithms that predict and prevent operational inefficiencies before they occur. Technology that's revolutionizing how major corporations approach efficiency management. Thomas was studying the documents with the careful attention of someone whose entire understanding of reality was being systematically dismantled. Sarah, this level of innovation, this requires advanced technical knowledge, substantial resources, years of development. All of which I had, I said calmly. While you all assumed I was playing with spreadsheets in my spare time, I was actually building proprietary technology that major corporations were willing to pay millions to access. I pulled out the industry recognition materials, awards, speaking engagements, and media coverage that painted a picture of success far beyond anything they had imagined. Entrepreneur of the Year, Massachusetts Business Association, Top 40 Under 40 Boston Business Journal, keynote speaker at the Harvard Business School Innovation Conference. Catherine was staring at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. The woman who had spent the evening lecturing me about appropriate ambitions for women in my position was now confronted with evidence that I had achieved more in 3 years than most entrepreneurs accomplish in a lifetime. You spoke at Harvard, she asked, her voice barely audible. Twice, I replied. Once about operational efficiency algorithms, and once about building sustainable consulting practices in competitive markets. Both presentations were standing room only. David had gone completely silent, his face cycling through expressions of shocked confusion and something that looked dangerously close to fear. The man who had joined his family in mocking my business acumen was now staring at evidence that his wife was worth more money than he could earn in 10 lifetimes. But I wasn't finished. The final document would be the one that destroyed any remaining doubt about the magnitude of what they had dismissed. And this, I said, lifting the Meridian Global contract proposal, is the complete acquisition package. $15 million for the initial purchase, plus a 5-year consulting contract worth an additional $12 million. I set the document down with deliberate precision, the numbers clearly visible to everyone at the table. $27 million total, for the hobby that Catherine wanted me to abandon so I could focus on charity work. The silence that followed was profound and absolute. These people who had spent years treating me like a well-meaning but limited person, whose dreams were too big for her capabilities, were now confronted with the reality that I had built something worth more money than their entire family fortune. Judge Robert was the first to attempt damage control his years of judicial experience, teaching him the importance of maintaining composure even when faced with shocking revelations. Sarah, this is quite remarkable. Clearly, we've all significantly underestimated the scope of your achievements. His words were diplomatic, carefully chosen to acknowledge the magnitude of what I'd revealed while trying to preserve some semblance of family dignity. But I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was already mentally recalibrating his treatment of me to match this new information about my actual status and power. Catherine, however, was not ready to surrender her position as family matriarch without a fight. Her recovery was swift and strategic, employing the kind of social maneuvering that had made her a formidable force in Boston's elite circles for decades. "Well, this is certainly a surprise," she said, her voice regaining some of its earlier authority. "Though I have to say, darling, it's rather unfortunate that you felt the need to be so secretive about your success." In less than 5 minutes of learning that she had been systematically undermining a multi-millionaire, Catherine was already rewriting history to position herself as a supportive mother-in-law who had simply been operating with incomplete information. "Secretive," I repeated, my voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Is that what you call protecting my achievements from people who were determined to diminish them?" I gestured toward the documents spread across the table. Every time I tried to share good news about my business, it was minimized, questioned, or dismissed as unrealistic ambition. "You called my work a little hobby. You suggested I was playing businesswoman. You threatened to socially isolate me if I didn't abandon my career." Catherine's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of calculation in her eyes as she tried to find a way to maintain control of the narrative. "I think there may have been some miscommunication about our concerns. We were simply worried about the stress you seemed to be under, trying to manage what we thought was a struggling small business." "A struggling small business," I said, my voice rising with 3 years of accumulated frustration that was generating more revenue than David's law firm partnership while simultaneously developing technology that's revolutionizing entire industries. Jennifer, meanwhile, was approaching the situation with the aggressive intellectual curiosity that had made her successful as a prosecutor. She leaned forward, her Harvard training evident in the way she began dissecting the evidence I had presented. "I'd like to understand the timeline here," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone cross-examining a witness. "When exactly did you start hiding the true scope of your business from the family? And more importantly, what was your motivation for maintaining such an elaborate deception?" The question was designed to put me on the defensive, to shift the focus from their behavior to mine. But I had been expecting this tactic since the moment I decided to reveal the truth. "My motivation," I said, looking directly at Jennifer, "was protecting my achievements from exactly the kind of systematic dismissal I experienced tonight. Every time I shared success, it was met with condescension disguised as concern." I turned to face the entire table, making eye contact with each person as I spoke. "When I landed my first major contract worth $75,000, Catherine dismissed it as a little project that might interfere with holiday entertaining. When I developed my first proprietary algorithm, David suggested I might be overcomplicating things. When I was featured in the Boston Business Journal, the reaction was polite acknowledgement, followed by suggestions that I focus on more appropriate pursuits." Michael joined his sister's interrogation, his federal prosecutor instincts apparently unable to resist the opportunity to probe what he clearly saw as suspicious behavior. "But surely you understand how this looks," he said, gesturing toward the documents spread across the table. "You've been living a double life for months, maybe years. How are we supposed to trust someone who's capable of such sustained deception?" The irony was staggering. The same people who had spent the evening systematically humiliating me were now positioning themselves as the victims of my dishonesty. "Trust," I laughed, and the sound was completely devoid of humor. "You want to talk about trust? How about trusting that your family member might actually be capable of building something meaningful? How about trusting that when someone shares their achievements, they deserve support rather than systematic undermining?" David, who had been silent since learning about the acquisition offer, finally found his voice. His words came out in a rush, as if he had been rehearsing them while processing the implications of what I had revealed. "Sarah, honey, I know things got a little heated tonight, but we can work through this," he said, reaching across the table toward my hand. Maybe we should have been more encouraging about your business, but that doesn't mean we can't start fresh now that we understand what you've really accomplished." His tone was conciliatory, almost pleading, and I realized that he was already calculating the social and financial implications of being married to someone worth significantly more than his family's entire net worth. But it was too late for damage control. The careful facade of family unity had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath their refined exteriors. They hadn't supported me when they thought I was struggling, and now they wanted to claim credit for my success once they understood its magnitude. "Start fresh," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying a weight that made everyone lean forward to hear me. "David, you just spent the evening joining your family in a systematic attack on my character, my capabilities, and my right to pursue meaningful work. You sat there while your mother threatened to socially isolate me if I didn't abandon my career. You joined in when they suggested I was too limited to understand my own real responsibilities." I stood up slowly, the movement commanding immediate attention from everyone at the table. The documents remained spread before me like evidence in a trial, each piece of paper a testament to the empire I had built while they tried to convince me I was failing. "And now that you know I'm worth $27 million, suddenly you want to work through this. Suddenly my business achievements are worth celebrating rather than dismissing." The room fell completely silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Every face around the table showed some variation of shock calculation or dawning realization of how catastrophically they had misjudged the situation. But I wasn't finished. 3 years of accumulated hurt and frustration had built to this moment, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly what their dismissiveness had cost them. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who no longer needed anything from them. "I'm accepting Meridian Global's acquisition offer. $27 million for the little hobby that you all insisted I should abandon to focus on charity work and social obligations." The numbers hit the room like a physical force. Even Judge Robert, who had been trying to maintain judicial neutrality, looked stunned by the sheer magnitude of what I was walking away with. $27 million? I repeated, letting each word land with devastating precision. More money than this entire family has accumulated over 4 generations of legal practice. Catherine made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Sarah, darling, surely we can discuss this as a family. There's no need for such drastic family," I interrupted, looking around the table at faces that had shown me nothing but condescension and cruelty. "You've made it very clear that I'm not family. I'm an inconvenience, a social obligation, a charity case that David imposed on all of you." I began gathering the documents, each movement deliberate and final. "You want to know what real family looks like? Real family celebrates your successes instead of diminishing them. Real family supports your ambitions instead of trying to crush them. Real family stands by you when you're building something meaningful, not just when they discover it's worth millions of dollars." The devastation on their faces was complete and absolute. These people who had wielded social power like a weapon, who had used their inherited status to make me feel small and grateful, were now confronted with the reality that they had systematically humiliated someone who surpassed them in every measurable way. But perhaps most crushing of all was the knowledge that their behavior had cost them any chance of sharing in my success. Instead of having a family member whose innovations could enhance their own careers and social standing, they had driven me away through their own arrogance and cruelty. "The woman who begged for your acceptance is gone," I said, heading toward the door with my folder of vindication. "In her place is someone who knows her worth and won't settle for anything less than she deserves." As I reached the doorway, I turned back for one final observation. You know what the most ironic part is? If you had just treated me with basic respect and support, You could have been part of something extraordinary. Instead, your need to keep me in my place cost you the chance to witness genuine innovation and success. I looked directly at David, this man who had chosen his family's approval over his wife's dignity. And you, David, could have been married to someone whose success enhanced rather than threatened your own. Instead, you chose to see me as a burden to be managed rather than a partner to be celebrated. The silence that followed was the sound of a family reckoning with the consequences of their own cruelty. They had gotten exactly what they thought they wanted. The humbling of the presumptuous outsider who had dared to have ambitions beyond their expectations. What they hadn't counted on was discovering that the outsider they'd been trying to humble was actually more successful than all of them combined. And now, dear friends, she was walking away from them forever, taking her $27 million empire with her. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most end up teaching themselves the most expensive lesson of all. The silence that followed my words was the kind of profound quiet that comes when an entire worldview collapses in real time. But I wasn't finished. 3 years of accumulated hurt, of being made to feel small and grateful, of having my dreams dismissed as inappropriate fantasies. All of it was about to pour out in a declaration that would leave no doubt about where I stood. I turned back to face the table, my eyes moving deliberately from person to person, taking in their shocked faces, their obvious calculations, their desperate attempts to process what had just happened to their carefully ordered world. "You know what, ladies watching tonight," I said, addressing my invisible audience of women who I knew would understand exactly what this moment meant. There comes a time in every woman's life when she has to choose between being liked and being respected. For 3 years, I chose being liked. Tonight, I'm choosing respect. I looked directly at Catherine, this woman who had made it her mission to keep me in what she considered my proper place. "Catherine, you spent this entire evening explaining to me what real success looks like for women in our position. You talked about charity boards and volunteer work as if they were the highest aspirations a woman like me could reasonably have." Catherine opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand that stopped her cold. "But here's what you never understood," I continued. "Real success isn't about fitting into someone else's definition of appropriate ambition. Real success is about building something meaningful with your own hands, your own mind, your own vision, regardless of whether other people approve." I pulled out my phone and held it up so they could see the screen. This morning, I received 3 separate acquisition offers. Meridian Global at $27 million, but also Pinnacle Consulting at $22 million and Atlantic Strategy Group at $19 million. Do you understand what that means? The numbers hung in the air like accusations. David's face had gone completely white, and I could see his hands trembling as he reached for his wine glass. It means that 3 of the world's most prestigious consulting firms are competing for the privilege of acquiring my little hobby. It means that the work you dismissed as embarrassing delusion is actually so innovative that major corporations are willing to engage in bidding wars to access it. Jennifer was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something that looked remarkably like awe mixed with professional envy. "Sarah, I had no idea. How did you even develop this level of expertise without any of us knowing?" "That's exactly the point, Jennifer," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "You had no idea because you never bothered to find out. You made assumptions about my capabilities based on my background, my education, my social connections, or lack thereof. You decided what I was worth before you ever bothered to understand what I was building." I turned to Michael, whose prosecutor confidence had completely evaporated. "You lectured me about the difference between hobbies and careers, about needing the right credentials and connections to operate where decisions really matter. But what you didn't understand is that I wasn't trying to operate in your world. I was creating an entirely new world." The documents on the table seemed to glow under the chandelier light, each piece of paper representing achievements that dwarfed anything any of them had accomplished individually or collectively. "Let me tell you about real impact, Michael," I said, pulling out a client testimonial from Massachusetts General Hospital. "My operational efficiency improvements at Mass General have reduced patient wait times by 40%, improved surgical scheduling accuracy by 60%, and saved the hospital system $2.3 million annually. That means better health care for thousands of patients, shorter wait times for families in crisis, and more resources available for actual medical care instead of administrative waste." I could see the impact of my words registering on his face. This wasn't abstract business success. This was measurable improvement in people's lives. "Or let's talk about Northeastern University." I continued, pulling out another document. "My algorithms optimized their student services operations so effectively that they were able to reduce tuition costs by 8% while improving graduation rates by 12%. That's thousands of students who can afford their education and achieve their dreams because of innovations you dismissed as a hobby." Judge Robert was studying the documents with the careful attention of someone whose entire understanding of his daughter-in-law was being systematically reconstructed. "Sarah, the scope of what you're describing, this isn't just business success. This is genuine social impact." "Exactly," I said, feeling a surge of satisfaction that at least one person in this room was beginning to understand. "While you all were lecturing me about appropriate ways for women to contribute to society, I was actually contributing, not through volunteer work or charity committees, but through innovations that improve how institutions operate, how resources are allocated, how services are delivered." But it was David's reaction that I was watching most carefully. My husband, the man who had sworn to honor and protect me, who had instead chosen to humiliate me in front of his entire family, was staring at the evidence of my success with an expression of dawning horror. "David," I said, my voice softer now, but no less devastating, "do you remember what you said during our engagement? You told me that I had shown you what it meant to love someone for who they really are." He nodded mutely, clearly afraid of where this was leading. "But that was a lie, wasn't it?" I continued. "Because the moment your family disapproved of who I really was, you stopped defending me. The moment my ambitions became inconvenient for your social standing, you joined them in trying to crush those ambitions." I pulled out the final document, a letter from the mayor of Boston thanking me for my work with the city's Operational Efficiency Task Force. "While you were embarrassed by my inappropriate career focus, I was working with city officials to improve municipal services. While you were worried about how my work reflected on the family reputation, I was developing solutions that saved taxpayers millions of dollars annually." The devastation on David's face was complete. He was beginning to understand not just what he had lost, but what he had actively destroyed through his own actions. "And now?" I said, my voice rising with the power of absolute moral authority. "You want to work through this? You want to start fresh, now that you know my net worth? You think that because my success is bigger than you imagined, somehow your behavior tonight becomes forgivable." I shook my head, feeling 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "But here's what you don't understand, David. It's not the money that matters. It's the principle. You chose to stand with people who were systematically trying to diminish me, rather than standing with your wife, who was building something extraordinary." Now I turned to address my audience directly, knowing that somewhere out there, women were watching who had experienced their own versions of this humiliation. Ladies, if you're watching this and you've ever been told that your dreams are too big, that your ambitions are inappropriate, that you should be grateful for what you have instead of building what you want, I want you to understand something fundamental. I gestured toward the Wellington family, these people who had wielded inherited privilege like a weapon against my aspirations. The people who try to make you small do it because your growth threatens their sense of superiority. They need you to stay limited so they can feel unlimited. They need you to fail so they can feel successful. Catherine was staring at me with an expression of complete bewilderment, as if she couldn't understand how the grateful daughter-in-law she'd been managing had transformed into this confident, powerful woman who commanded respect rather than begging for it. But what they don't understand, I continued, is that your success doesn't diminish them unless they choose to see it that way. A confident woman doesn't threaten a secure man. An accomplished daughter-in-law doesn't embarrass a family unless that family's identity depends on her remaining lesser than them. I looked around the table one final time, taking in the faces of people who had spent 3 years convincing me that I should be grateful for their tolerance. So here's my final declaration. I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had just reclaimed her own power. I don't need the Wellington money. I make more in a single quarter than this family's law firm generates in a year. I don't need Wellington social connections. My clients include Fortune 500 CEOs who value innovation over inheritance. I don't need Wellington approval. I have the respect of industry leaders who judge me on my capabilities rather than my bloodline. The words hung in the air like a complete repudiation of everything they had tried to make me believe about my place in their world. And most importantly, I said, looking directly at David, I don't need a husband who sees my success as a threat to his masculinity rather than a compliment to his own achievements. I don't need a man who chooses his family's comfort over his wife's dignity. I don't need someone who only values me when my net worth forces him to. David tried to speak, his voice coming out in a broken whisper. Sarah, please. I love you. We can fix this. Love? I repeated, and my laugh contained 3 years of accumulated pain. David, love supports. Love defends. Love celebrates the other person's achievements instead of feeling threatened by them. What you felt for me might have been affection or possession or even genuine care, but it wasn't love. Because love wouldn't have allowed you to sit silent while your family systematically tried to destroy my self-worth. I gathered the documents that had transformed me from grateful outsider to powerful equal, sliding them back into the folder that had changed everything. The woman who walked into this dining room tonight, desperately hoping for your acceptance, is gone forever. I said, my voice steady and final. In her place is someone who knows that acceptance can't be earned from people who are invested in your failure. It can only be demanded from people who are capable of respecting your success. I turned toward the door, then paused for one final observation that would crystallize everything that had happened in this room. You know what the saddest part is? If you had just treated me as an equal from the beginning, if you had supported my ambitions instead of trying to crush them, if you had celebrated my achievements instead of dismissing them, you could have been part of something revolutionary. Instead, your need to keep me in my place cost you the chance to be associated with genuine innovation and success. I looked at each of them one final time. Catherine with her social manipulation, Jennifer with her inherited privilege, Michael with his prosecutorial arrogance, Thomas with his judicial authority, and David with his cowardly betrayal. But that's your loss, not mine. Because tomorrow morning, I'm going to wake up as a woman worth $27 million who built an empire through her own intelligence and determination. And you're going to wake up as people who systematically underestimated and humiliated someone who turned out to be more successful than all of you combined. The silence that followed was the sound of a family reckoning with the consequences of their own cruelty. They had gotten exactly what they thought they wanted. The humbling of the presumptuous outsider who had dared to dream beyond their expectations. What they hadn't counted on was discovering that the outsider was actually more accomplished than any of them had ever imagined possible. As I walked toward the door, I could feel their eyes following me, could sense the desperate mental calculations as they tried to figure out how to salvage something from the wreckage of their assumptions. But it was too late for damage control. The careful hierarchy of the Wellington family had been completely destroyed, replaced by the devastating knowledge that the woman they had been trying to diminish was actually the most successful person in the room. Ladies, I said, addressing my audience one final time, remember this moment. Remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's approval. Remember that success belongs to the bold, not the grateful. And remember that sometimes walking away from people who can't see your value is the most powerful thing you can do. I reached the doorway and turned back for one last look at the dining room where my old life had died and my new life had been born. Goodbye, Wellington family, I said, my voice carrying across the silent room like a final verdict. Thank you for teaching me that I never needed you as much as you needed me to believe I did. And with that, I walked out of their world forever, carrying my $27 million empire with me. The revolution was complete. The woman who had begged for scraps of acceptance was gone, replaced by someone who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for anything less. Sometimes, dear friends, the people who try hardest to break you end up giving you exactly the strength you need to soar higher than they ever could. And that's a lesson worth $27 million. The first thing you learn about walking away from a life-changing confrontation, dear friends, is that the adrenaline eventually wears off. And when it does, you're left standing in your empty carriage house at 11:30 at night, holding a folder worth $27 million, wondering what on earth you're supposed to do next. I'll be honest with you. For about 10 minutes after I got home from that dinner, I sat on my couch and just stared at the walls. The woman who had just delivered the most devastating verbal takedown in Wellington family history was suddenly faced with the very practical question of where to sleep when you've just blown up your entire life. The silence in our little carriage house felt different than it ever had before. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a home shared with someone you love. It was the hollow emptiness of a place you've already outgrown. Every piece of furniture, every wedding gift, every carefully chosen decoration suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's life. My phone started ringing at exactly 11:45. David's name lit up the screen, and I found myself staring at it with a strange sense of detachment. 3 hours earlier, seeing his call would have filled me with hope that he wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make things right between us. Now I felt nothing but a mild curiosity about what he possibly thought he could say. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to the message, not because I was hoping for reconciliation, but because I was genuinely interested in hearing how someone tries to apologize for publicly humiliating their spouse in front of their entire family. "Sarah, please pick up." His voice came through the speaker, and I could hear the panic underneath his carefully controlled tone. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but we need to talk about this. What happened tonight? It got out of hand. Mother was wrong to say those things, and I was wrong not to defend you. But that doesn't mean we can't work through this as a couple. As if tonight had been a minor disagreement about household chores, rather than a systematic character assassination that revealed the fundamental incompatibility between who I was and who they needed me to be. The calls kept coming. David called 6 more times over the next 2 hours, each message growing increasingly desperate as he began to understand that I wasn't just upset, I was done. The final message, left at nearly 2 in the morning, was barely coherent. "Sarah, please, I know I messed up tonight, but you can't just walk away from our marriage because of one dinner. We took vows, we made promises, and I love you. I know I didn't show it tonight, but I do love you. Please just call me back so we can talk about this rationally." rationally. There was that word again, the idea that what had happened tonight was somehow an emotional overreaction on my part rather than a completely logical response to years of systematic dismissal and tonight's ultimate betrayal. I deleted all the messages without responding to a single one. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that surprised me. I wasn't devastated or heartbroken or even particularly angry anymore. I was liberated. For the first time in 3 years, I was completely free to make decisions based solely on what I wanted, rather than what would make the Wellington family comfortable. My first call was to Dr. Angela Chin at Meridian Global. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I was hoping to hear from you soon. Have you had a chance to review our proposal?" "I have," I replied, looking out the window of the carriage house toward the main mansion where my husband was probably having a very difficult conversation with his parents about the previous evening's revelations. "And I'm ready to accept your offer. When can we schedule a meeting to finalize the details?" There was a brief pause, and I could almost hear her mental celebration. "Congratulations, Sarah. You're making an excellent decision. I can be in Boston tomorrow afternoon if that works for you. We'll want to get our legal teams involved immediately to begin the due diligence process." "Perfect," I said, though I should mention that I'll need to establish a new primary address for all documentation. I'll be relocating within the next few days. If Dr. Chin was curious about my sudden need for relocation, she was too professional to ask. "Of course, we can handle all of that as part of the transition process. Welcome to the Meridian Global family, Sarah." The irony of that phrase wasn't lost on me. I was leaving one family and joining another, except this family valued my contributions rather than trying to minimize them. My second call was to the most expensive divorce attorney in Boston. Margaret Richardson had a reputation for handling high-net-worth divorces with the kind of surgical precision that left no loose ends and no room for reconciliation. When I called her office and mentioned that I needed to discuss dissolving a marriage involving significant business assets, her assistant scheduled me for that same afternoon. "The beauty of your situation," Margaret explained after I'd outlined the basic facts of my case, "is that the prenuptial agreement your husband's family insisted upon actually works entirely in your favor. They were so concerned about protecting Wellington assets from a gold-digging wife that they created ironclad provisions separating business interests acquired before and during the marriage." She flipped through the pages of the prenup with obvious satisfaction. "Your consulting business was established using your maiden name, operated independently of any Wellington resources, and generated revenue through contracts that have no connection to your husband's family or their law firm. From a legal standpoint, they have absolutely no claim to any portion of your business assets." "What about the house?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The carriage house belongs to the main estate, which is owned by David's parents. You have no legal claim to it, but given that you're about to be worth $27 million, I suspect that won't be a hardship." Margaret leaned back in her leather chair with the expression of someone who was genuinely enjoying her work. "In fact, this might be the most straightforward high-asset divorce I've ever handled. No shared business interests, no joint real estate holdings, no children to complicate custody arrangements. The Wellington family's obsession with protecting their wealth has essentially handed you a perfect exit strategy." That afternoon, while Margaret's team began drafting divorce papers, I went apartment hunting in downtown Boston. Not for a modest one-bedroom that would be appropriate for a newly single woman starting over, but for a penthouse that would reflect my actual financial status rather than the diminished version of myself I'd been pretending to be for 3 years. The Millennium Tower penthouse was exactly what I hadn't known I was looking for. floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Boston Harbor, a modern kitchen that would never need to accommodate Wellington family dinner parties, and most importantly, a home office with enough space to properly manage a multi-million-dollar business empire. The previous owner was a tech entrepreneur, the realtor explained as we toured the space. He designed the office to accommodate video conferences with international clients, secure document storage, and all the technology infrastructure you'd need to run a global operation. Perfect, I said, signing the lease agreement on the spot. I'll take it. The realtor blinked in surprise. Don't you want to think it over? Discuss it with your husband. No, husband, I replied cheerfully, and no need to think it over. When you know, you know. Moving out of the carriage house took exactly 4 hours. It was remarkable how little I'd actually accumulated during 3 years of marriage. When you subtracted all the wedding gifts, inherited furniture, and objects that belonged more to the Wellington legacy than to Sarah Mitchell. My clothes, my personal books, my laptop, and a few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from my family. That was essentially it. Everything else belonged to the life I was leaving behind. David was at the law firm when I came to collect my things, which was probably for the best. Catherine, however, was very much present, watching from the main house's kitchen window as I loaded boxes into the moving truck I'd hired. She eventually emerged wrapped in a cashmere shawl and wearing the expression of someone who was about to make a diplomatic overture. "Sarah, dear," she said, approaching with the careful steps of someone navigating a minefield. "I think perhaps we should talk about what happened last night. Emotions were running high, and perhaps things were said that we all regret." I paused in my packing to look at her with genuine curiosity. "Catherine, what exactly do you regret about last night?" She seemed taken aback by the directness of my question. "Well, perhaps I was overly direct in my concerns about your career focus. And certainly David should have been more supportive in his responses. So you regret your tone," I said, "but not your actual position that I should abandon my business to focus on charity work and childbearing." Catherine's diplomatic smile faltered slightly. "I think there might have been some misunderstanding about what we were suggesting." "No misunderstanding," I replied, lifting another box into the truck. "You made your position quite clear. The only thing that's changed is that you now know my little hobby is worth $27 million, so you're trying to reframe your hostility as concern. Sarah, surely you can understand that we were only thinking about what would be best for your marriage for David's career." "For David's career," I repeated. "Not for mine, never for mine. That's exactly the problem, Catherine." I closed the truck's back door with a satisfying slam and turned to face her one final time. "You know what's interesting," I said. "Last night you were so concerned about how my work reflected on the family reputation. But I wonder how it's going to reflect on the family reputation when word gets out that you systematically undermined and ultimately drove away a daughter-in-law who turned out to be worth more money than the entire Wellington dynasty." Catherine's face went through several shades of pale as the implications of what I was saying began to sink in. "Because it will get out, Catherine. Boston's social circles are remarkably small, and business success at this level doesn't stay secret for long. People are going to know that the Wellington family had a multimillionaire in their midst and treated her so poorly that she walked away from everything rather than tolerate their behavior." I climbed into the passenger seat of the moving truck and rolled down the window for my parting words. "Give my regards to David when he gets home. Tell him he can reach me through my attorney if he needs anything." The penthouse felt like stepping into my real life for the first time in years. As I unpacked my belongings into spaces that were actually large enough to accommodate them, I kept marveling at how different everything felt when you weren't constantly trying to make yourself smaller to fit other people's expectations. That evening, I ordered takeout from the Thai restaurant I'd always wanted to try, but couldn't because David thought ethnic food was too adventurous for regular consumption. I ate it while sitting on my new couch, looking out at the city lights and planning the next phase of my life. The integration with Meridian Global moved forward with the efficiency that only comes from working with people who value your time and expertise. Dr. Chen's team handled every detail of the transition, from establishing my new office within their Boston headquarters to coordinating media announcements about the acquisition. We'd like to position this as a major strategic move for Meridian Global, Dr. Chen explained during one of our planning meetings. Your operational efficiency innovations represent exactly the kind of forward-thinking technology that our clients need. We want the business community to understand that we're not just acquiring a company, we're bringing revolutionary capabilities in-house. The press release that went out the following week was everything I hadn't dared to dream of 3 years earlier, when I was desperately trying to convince the Wellington family that my work had value. Meridian Global acquires revolutionary efficiency consulting firm for $27 million, read the headline in the Boston Business Journal. The article went on to describe my innovations in glowing terms, quoting industry experts who praised my algorithms as game-changing and the future of operational consulting. More importantly, the article identified me by my professional name, Sarah Mitchell, founder and CEO of Mitchell Solutions, rather than as Mrs. David Wellington. For the first time in years, my identity was defined by what I had accomplished rather than who I had married. The social fallout was swift and exactly as devastating to the Wellington family's reputation as I had predicted it would be. Boston's elite social circles operate on a complex system of relationships, reputation, and perceived status. The revelation that the Wellington family had systematically undermined and ultimately lost a daughter-in-law worth $27 million was exactly the kind of scandal that would be discussed at every charity gala and country club gathering for years to come. Jennifer called me exactly 1 week after the press release appeared, her voice carrying a mixture of professional curiosity and personal desperation. "Sarah, I saw the article in the Business Journal. Congratulations on your success with Meridian Global." "Thank you, Jennifer," I replied, genuinely curious about where this conversation was heading. I was wondering, my firm is actually looking for consultants who specialize in operational efficiency for our corporate clients. Given your expertise and our family connection, I thought perhaps we could explore some kind of professional collaboration. Family connection. The same family connection that had been used to justify 3 years of condescension and dismissal was now being positioned as the foundation for a business relationship. "I appreciate the interest," I said, "but Meridian Global's client roster is already fully booked for the next 18 months. I'm sure you understand." The silence that followed was heavy with everything Jennifer couldn't say. That she was desperate to associate her firm with my success, that the Wellington family's treatment of me was becoming a social liability, that they were all scrambling to find ways to repair relationships they had burned through their own arrogance. "Of course," she finally said, "but perhaps in the future when your schedule opens up?" "Perhaps," I replied, though we both knew that future would never come. The divorce papers were served to David at his office on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who handed them over with the same professional courtesy he might use for any other legal document. According to Margaret Richardson, David's reaction was exactly what she had predicted. "Complete shock followed by immediate panic," she reported after speaking with David's attorney. "He apparently had convinced himself that you were just upset and would eventually come around. The reality that you're actually ending the marriage seems to have hit him like a freight train." "Has he agreed to the terms?" I asked. "He doesn't really have a choice. The prenuptial agreement makes this about as straightforward as a divorce can be." No shared assets to divide, no alimony claims from either party, no custody issues to resolve. He can contest it if he wants, but his own family's prenup makes it impossible for him to claim any portion of your business assets. David made one final attempt at reconciliation, appearing at my penthouse building on a Thursday evening, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The doorman called up to announce his arrival, and I found myself genuinely curious about what he thought he could possibly say. 5 minutes, I told him when he arrived at my door. That's all. He looked around the penthouse with obvious shock, taking in the luxury finishes, the spectacular views, and the clear evidence that I was thriving without him. Sarah, this is incredible. How did you afford all this? The same way I afforded everything else for the past 3 years, I replied, through my work. The work your family spent 3 years telling me to abandon. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our dating days when he was struggling with difficult concepts. I know I messed up, he said. I know my family was wrong about your business, and I was wrong not to defend you. But surely we can work past this. You're my wife, Sarah. We made vows. We did make vows, I agreed. You promised to honor and protect me. How did that work out? One mistake, he said desperately. One dinner where I didn't handle things the way I should have. That's not worth destroying our entire marriage. I looked at this man who still didn't understand that the problem wasn't one dinner. It was 3 years of systematic dismissal, culminating in one dinner where he chose to publicly humiliate me rather than defend me. David, I said gently, you didn't make one mistake. You made hundreds of them. Every time you failed to defend my work, every time you joined your family in suggesting I was overreaching, every time you chose their comfort over my dignity. Last week was just the culmination of 3 years of showing me exactly where I stood in your priorities. But I love you, he said, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he sounded genuinely broken. I know I didn't show it properly, but I do love you. I know you do, I replied, and I meant it. But love without respect isn't enough, and respect can't be rebuilt after it's been so completely destroyed. He left that night understanding that our marriage was truly over, that no amount of apologies or promises could repair the fundamental damage that had been done. The final divorce decree was signed on a crisp December morning, exactly 6 months after that devastating dinner at the Wellington Mansion. I walked out of the courthouse as Sarah Mitchell, once again free to build whatever life I wanted without having to consider anyone else's expectations or limitations. That afternoon, I called my sister Lisa in Denver. It's over, I told her. The divorce is final. How do you feel? She asked, her voice full of concern and love. I looked out the window of my penthouse office, where I was reviewing plans for the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing funding and support for women entrepreneurs who were building innovative businesses. I feel like myself again, I said. For the first time in years, I feel like myself. Good, Lisa said firmly. You deserve to be with people who celebrate your success instead of trying to diminish it. 6 months later, I was standing in the ballroom of the Four Seasons delivering the keynote address at the New England Women in Business Conference. The audience of 500 successful women hung on every word as I told them the story of building a $27 million empire, while the people closest to me tried to convince me I was failing. Ladies, I concluded, looking out at faces that reflected my own journey of discovery and empowerment. Your worth is not determined by other people's ability to recognize it. Your success does not require anyone else's permission, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who can't see your value and build something extraordinary with people who can. The standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes. After my speech, a young woman approached me, maybe 25 years old, with the kind of determined expression I recognized from my own mirror 3 years earlier. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, "I'm starting a tech company focused on environmental sustainability, but my family keeps telling me I should get a real job instead of chasing unrealistic dreams. After hearing your story tonight, I wanted to ask, how do you know when it's worth it to keep fighting for your vision?" I smiled at her, remembering the woman I used to be, the one who had doubted herself because other people doubted her. "You know it's worth it," I told her, "when walking away from people who don't believe in you feels like freedom instead of loss." Tonight, as I prepare to close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with this truth. Dear friends, you are more capable than anyone who tries to diminish you could ever imagine. Your dreams are not too big, your ambitions are not inappropriate, and your success does not require anyone else's approval. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most end up giving you exactly the motivation you need to prove them wrong. And sometimes proving them wrong is worth $27 million. But more importantly, it's worth remembering who you really are when you stop trying to be who everyone else wants you to be. Thank you for taking this journey with me, beautiful souls. Remember, you're stronger than you think, more capable than they believe, and absolutely worthy of the success you're building. Now go out there and show them what you're really made of. So here's what I want you to remember. Beautiful souls, your worth isn't measured by who believes in you. It's measured by what you build, despite who doesn't. Tonight, somewhere out there, there's a woman being told her dreams are too big. I hope she remembers Sarah's story. I hope she builds her empire anyway. And I hope when her moment comes, she has her own manila folder ready.